Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
Jonathan, thank you for joining me this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw your video probably a little over a month ago, maybe about that time frame, and you were speaking at an event, and you raised your hand and you asked Andrew Huberman a question, and I thought it was really bold and intelligent, and I really liked what you did there, and I thought this kid is an inspiration, and I think, you're only 19 years old, but I love that because when I was 19, I definitely wasn't going to events where Andrew Huberman was at, and I definitely wasn't asking the questions that you're asking and doing the things that you're doing. So I think people like you are inspirational to the newer generations coming up. And I thought we could explore a little bit about who you are and how you think. And so here we are.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, how did you even end up at that event? How did you get into this field? Let's get into some of who you are.
Yeah. So, growing up, I was raised in a holistic household. So, really, like, we didn't really go to the doctor. And basically, when I got sick, right, my mom would have, her holistic, like, remedies that she had. So we did everything from like essential oils to Epsom salt baths, infrared saunas, and much more. But so I was raised in that environment, right? That's just how I was raised up. That's how I was raised up to think, and also think, to like question stuff. So that was really just like engraved in me from like a really early starting point. I was raised vegan my entire life. That's kind of like the backbone of the like environment that I was raised in, and like healthy vegan, right? So you can have unhealthy vegan diet and then a healthy one, just basically whole foods. But yeah, I was raised in that environment. And then about coming up to 3 years from now is when I really started diving deep into the science, because basically I was like listening to what my mom was teaching me, what my mom was telling me, and it was just, all right, I was hearing what my mom said and just taking that for fact, right? And I was like, all right, like, why am I believing this stuff? So I really wanted to actually have like a strong foundation of what I believed in. And the way I saw to have that is to actually dive deep into the science and figure out, is this stuff true? Does this stuff actually work? And just like really, and I love that, right? So currently in college right now, but this started in high school, like sophomore year. And that's kind of when I shifted over to like really loving science and loving my science classes and all that. And then about probably less than a year ago is when I listened to a podcast with Jack Kruse, Rick Rubin, and Andrew Huberman, which you've probably listened to or are aware about. And when I listened to that like exploded in my mind, and all the stuff that Jack had to say, and then alongside Andrew Huberman, who I looked up to so much, right? I mean, he's a huge figure on YouTube and Instagram and in the podcast space, and being a professor at Stanford, it that resonated with me. And then for him to be listening to these really, like, I mean, you could say like wild ideas, not ideas that aren't really talked about. It was awesome to hear. So that podcast definitely shifted the way that I thought, especially around health. So light environment was something that I was thinking about. So growing up, I never like wore sunscreen or stuff like that. But it wasn't a focus that we really had. Like, we didn't focus on our light environment that much. And so what Jack has to say really resonated with me, and the science is there, and I've dove deep into it. And it's so awesome to explore. But yeah, so that's kind of a little bit of my background. And then this event that you're referring to, yeah. So it was Eudaimonia, and it was basically a health conference, the first health conference that they had, so that Eudaimonia had. And I went with my brother Joseph, And yeah, Andrew Huberman was like kind of like the big event there. I mean, there was a bunch of other really amazing people, Mark Hyman, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, some really like influential people in the health space that were there. And yeah, so it was funny actually. So like, do you know who Robert Love is on Instagram?
I don't think so.
Okay, so he has a pretty big following, and he's a neuroscientist. And so he was there. He was sitting right behind me at this specific talk with Huberman,
Hmm.
and so basically Gabrielle Lyon was I guess the like coordinator, so she was asking Huberman questions, and she goes, all right guys, we're gonna have one more question, and then after this we're gonna open it up to the floor for people to ask questions. And so the mic runners come up to the like stage, and they're bringing the mics, two mics on both aisles, and I see Dr. Love. He pops up right behind me and goes straight to the mic before they even say, all right, let's people come up to the mic. And so I saw him doing it. I'm like, oh shoot, like if I want to ask Huberman a question, like this is my time. And so I asked my brother, I'm like, Joe, should I go ask a question? And he was like, do it. So I went right up, right behind Dr. Love, and yeah, I asked Huberman that question, and um, he gave me a pretty lengthy response. The responses were only supposed to be like 30 seconds, but I think he went for like 3 minutes or something like that. So it was pretty cool. But yeah, that was my experience there. It was awesome. Jack saw that response, and then that's how I got him on my podcast. But yeah, that's kind of that story.
I love it. That's a cool story, and I'm sure it took some courage there to be standing in line to ask that particular question because as much as you respect both of those guys, you put them on the spot. And, that 7 hour podcast, I've listened to it multiple times and I'll listen to it over and over again throughout my life. And I can only send that podcast to a few people because a lot of people just don't have the attention span or the interest to dive that deep into that subject matter. But you obviously do. And I think the type of people that are willing to dive deep into that particular subject are going to make huge headway in this next 10 years or so because it's paradigm pushing.
Hmm.
And someone like yourself who's studying biology and neuroscience, and you're very smart and you're very open already. You're not sort of unpacking and unlearning too much. You haven't been fully indoctrinated and
Exactly. Yep.
institutionalized. So I feel
Yep.
like it's a nice fresh slate for you. Whereas a lot of other people who are very highly intelligent would have a hard time listening to Dr. Jack Kruse and do. And he also has a way of communicating that's not easy, right? It's like
For
he's very
sure.
direct,
Yep.
he's very East Coast style, and he's held a lot of information for however many years, 30, 40 years, that not only about the science, but about the corruption and
Hmm.
about the capture of the institutions. And some of the stuff that he's aware of probably has created, at least from my perspective, anger, as you should have. If you're not
Yeah.
angry, you're not paying attention type thing. But his communication method obviously can't be grasped or digested by a lot of people because they just shut down. And
Yep.
so, one of the things I think we can do is learn from people like Dr. Jack Kruse because he's brilliant. I think he's one of the smartest people I've ever come across as
I
far as
agree.
being able to
Yeah.
recall and not have notes. And he's
It's
so
crazy.
articulate. It's
It's
incredible to
amazing.
listen
Yeah.
to him. And even Huberman seems so humbled during that 7 hours. It was like this brilliant guy who I respect as well was just constantly being sort of pulled back. Hold on a minute. Let's go back to this. Let's go back to this. And so he sent me down the rabbit hole as well, where I started reading Becker's work and started getting into Andrew Marino's work. And it's like, this is mind bending stuff. And so I'm excited to see a 19-year-old young man going forth, because that means that there's a bunch of other people too that are around your age, and they're starting to study these fields. And it just gives me hope, because sometimes you listen to Dr. Jack on like a Danny Jones podcast, and it's like, oh shit, man, this is deeply embedded. The swamp is really nasty and deep, and are we going to make it type of thing? But I think we have hope. And you're one of the people that actually lights me up and makes me go, yes, there's tons of intelligent people. What's her name? Alexis. She's
Yep.
brilliant. Cohen.
Alexis Cowan. Yeah.
She's articulate, and she's able to fire off a lot of this information and synthesize it for the average person. So I'm just stoked to see people like yourself in the field, man. And
Yeah.
I'm proud of you for asking that question, and I'm actually proud of Andrew for coming up with the answer that he had, even if it wasn't the answer that maybe we wanted to hear, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. It definitely was a little nerve-wracking going up there, but I'm happy I did it. And
Absolutely.
and yeah, no, I think there is, I mean, it's really tough because like I think there is hope, but at the same time, it is like the centralized dogma of science is so engraved into just like the field that it's really hard to even push like new ideas. But I think there is hope. Like, so I go to a small liberal arts college in North Carolina right now, and like I share my ideas very openly to people, especially like just like so I'm a big fan of Gerald Pollack, right? And just his like fundamental ideas in biology. I've shared with a couple like seniors and juniors who are bio majors, um, and they're like they're open to listening, which is good, right? Now, it goes so against what they've been taught, and when you go against someone's core beliefs, like that's hard. Like people don't want to like hear something that goes against what their core belief is. It is hard, and that's human nature. And
Hmm.
so when you do share these things, um, I mean, look, I love Jack. Like he's great. Genius, like you said. I agree with everything you said. But the way he does share things, it's hard. It's like that way is extremely hard for people to digest and to be open to hearing about it. So I try to go about it in a more calm manner and more of a open manner, right? So more of like, look, honestly, I don't know the truth. I don't think you know the truth. I don't think anyone knows the truth, right? I don't think anyone really, really knows what is true because that's just impossible. Like that's why we're here is to figure things out, and the
Hmm.
way we figure things out is by, you know, is by having our own beliefs and sharing those beliefs and being able to share those beliefs. If we're not able to share those beliefs, that's where things just don't go very well.
Yeah, no, that's wisdom at a young age, dude. And I don't actually look at age anymore as a factor because I've met people in the last 10 years that are under 25 years old that are far more open and brilliant than I've met 70-year-olds who are closed-minded, and they've been ingrained in some sort of ideology so deeply that they have no capacity to be in this state that you just described, which is to explore and be curious and to let go,
Hmm.
because a lot of learning is unlearning. And,
Exactly.
I've had to try to work with that over the years too, because I was institutionalized and indoctrinated like everybody else. It's like the Matrix. And the more we can just recognize that people are living inside of different paradigms, like you said,
Hmm.
it helps you to be able to communicate with a little bit more compassion, I think, not to virtue signal, but more just like, all right, I was once and am inside of a belief system, which I
Hmm.
like Robert Anton Wilson would say it's BS.
Hmm.
Belief systems, we all carry them and we all have them, and there's infinite layers. And if you realize that we're all inside of some sort of paradigm or belief system, then you would have to recognize, like, how do we actually connect and communicate at the level that they're willing to hear the message? And, I even had Dr. Jack on my podcast. I don't know when, a few months back, maybe 5 months ago or something. And it was my first encounter with communicating with him. And he did catch me off guard. And I work with the fire department for 19 years. So I'm around a bunch of savages. And these guys we aren't walking on eggshells, and we're not easily offended. And so I'm not easily offended. But when I started to just ask some basic questions, he immediately jumped on me and started to go, I can't believe you asked me that, and he sort of shouted me down, and it was very interesting. And he said, I don't give a shit about the people. I don't give a shit about you or your kids and all this stuff. And it's like, well, what is the point? Like, do you only want to talk to the savages, the small 0.01% of people that already know the message? Or do you want to actually try to get everybody, which is what I
Hmm.
would like,
Hmm.
to start to be a little bit more connected and realize that we're all in this together and that we're not separate. And then I'm thinking, like, at one point, Dr. Jack didn't know all the stuff that Dr. Jack knows. He
Exactly.
had to
Yeah.
go through his own paradigm shifts. And so the anger really comes at his previous self. And it also comes from all the other. You just start to realize it's just sadness, and he cares. The guy
Exactly.
actually cares a lot.
Yeah.
So it comes from a good place, and I can see beyond that. But sometimes it just makes it really difficult because you're like, I want to sit here for 3 more hours and really start to unpack and try to get the gold. so that the average person can hear it and make those shifts, like you're saying, because
Yeah.
it's
No,
hard.
I agree 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, so the art of communication is something that we all have to try to cultivate throughout our lives, and I'm not good at it. And the only way to get good at it is to practice and try to
Yeah,
bring awareness to it. But
for
I'm
sure.
curious. So you
For sure.
mentioned your mother. Was your father in the picture, or was
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
around,
So
and was he
yeah,
open?
yeah. Yeah. So I'll tell you the story. So basically, um, my parents they got divorced when I was 5, and when they were together, like they were both in the the lifestyle, right? Living a healthy lifestyle. In fact, so my dad, when he met my mom, he had seizures and he was on Dilantin, which is like a medication they give for people who have seizures. And when my mom met John Galmaga, who was on my other podcast, and he's been in the health space for over 40 years, way ahead of his time, also. But when my mom met John, she basically started having sessions with John, and John was like telling her everything that she needs to do, and also helping my dad out. And so I don't know the exact timeline on how long this was. I believe it was something like 6 weeks or something like that. But within this like 6 week time frame, which is really short, my dad lost 60 pounds, and he was pretty much completely off of Dilantin and
Wow.
without having any seizures, and basically just uh, this following the specific protocol that John had for him, and he was in a great position health wise, um, and better than he's ever been in his life. But yeah, so when I was 5, my parents got divorced, and then my dad went off the health track, and then just coming up to 3 years ago, which is when I started diving into the science, my dad unfortunately passed away. And
Mm,
that is also why I started getting into the science. And it was a wake up call for me. Obviously, like I'm so young, so like um not a wake up call in the sense of like, all right, I'm so unhealthy, I need to change things, but a wake up call for, like you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? And you don't know if you're going to be things aren't guaranteed, essentially, right? And so that was a huge wake up call for me. And during that time also, like I mean, look, I was probably living a much healthier life than most kids my age, but it still wasn't like that great, right? Um, I like ate. I didn't eat the cleanest. I was vegan, but I ate like Beyond Burgers and stuff like that, which is extremely not healthy for us. And so really, I had like this overnight shift where I was like, all right, I'm gonna start changing stuff. That's when I basically I just dove into podcasts and books and the literature and all that. Um, and yeah, so that is really what sparked that in me. But yeah, so that's where my dad fits in as well.
yeah. Death is such a driving motivator for humans, and I think at a young age, I can't imagine. I haven't lost my dad yet, so I know that that's hard in general, but it definitely makes you start to think of the most important thing that you can do to leverage your life force energy while you're here. And I was thinking, if you ever get around to it in your lifetime, put it on your list. The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. Have you ever heard of
Okay,
that book?
I have not. No.
Phenomenal book, but
Yeah.
it's all about how death is the foundation of what makes human beings so unique compared to
Mm-hmm.
all other species because of our subconscious awareness of our mortality. And
Mm-hmm.
so it drives the best art, the best music, but it also drives war, chaos, and ideology and all the things that are negative. But it's phenomenal, and it made me think of that. But was your mother like more of a? Are you a vegan, by the way, right now?
So when I meet someone like right away, I would say,
Hmm.
yeah, like I would tell them I'm a vegan. I'm not
Yeah,
really a vegan. So I eat basically my diet, I would
I know
say.
it's a touchy subject for people because it's like it puts you in a box, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, Basically what I would say, and look, like I don't care if people come
Sure.
at me about this, like I don't care.
Yeah.
um, but so I basically eat a plant dominant diet. I also eat eggs, and the eggs that I do eat, I try to find the highest quality eggs. So organic, soy-free, corn-free, pasture-raised eggs, typically from the farmer's market. So I'll eat eggs, and then also eat like ghee and stuff like that. But I've never had any meat or chicken or fish or nothing like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
I was just curious because I heard
Yeah.
you mention that, and I'm like, I wonder what his diet is like. But was your mother, I'm just wondering, is she like, was she a hippie type? Is that how she didn't choose to vaccinate you and all the things that you've been able to have
Yeah.
as an opportunity to
Yeah.
not be all
So,
jabbed up?
yeah. So no, definitely not hippie type, but so she was raised in a pretty low income household. It was just her and her mom, um, and she had two siblings, and they also her mom adopted a lot of kids, but yeah. So growing up, they were in a very low income household, so they didn't really even have like I'm pretty sure my mom didn't even have like health insurance or anything like that, so they didn't really go to the doctor. And
Mm,
so my mom just wasn't raised that way. She did get vaccinated when she was a kid, but even I mean back then, I don't know, they may have had like two vaccines for children. And yeah, so she just wasn't raised around doctors and things like that. And yeah, I mean that's kind of what it was. And she was also very open minded, right? Like when she met John, the way she found John was she had a friend who had breast cancer, and um, not like a really close friend, but acquaintance. And she told me that she's told me the story a few times, and she was in Whole Foods, and or I think what used to be Whole Foods near us, but she was in a grocery store, and she saw her friend, and they were talking, and basically her friend was like, I met this guy John Galamaga, and he is helping me to get rid of my breast cancer naturally. And my mom,
mm.
the way she tells this is she was in a way shocked and like, whoa, like I've never heard of that before. I want to learn basically, right? And so my mom got in contact with John, and yeah, like I said, helped my dad out, and then also helped my grandma out. I never met my grandma, but um they so my grandma had a lot of congestive heart failures and had a lot of heart problems. Um and when she met, and so during that time, she was given uh I believe two or I believe 6 months to live. So she was given 6 months to live by the doctors. And she was having like a bunch of these like small little heart attacks. 6 months to live, and then my mom was like, "All right, I mean, I'm hearing what John has to say. Let's try it, right? What do I have to lose?" So my mom got her mom on this diet and this lifestyle, and sure enough, 9 years later, she was still living and passed away 9 years later. But
Wow.
she had 9 more years essentially, right? And from that and from what John helped my dad with, my mom was like, "All right, this is how I'm raising my children. Obviously, this works." And from there, it's history.
Amazing. I need to listen to that episode you did with John and find out more about it. But like, tell the audience and me, what are some of the things that like he changed your father's lifestyle? Like, what are the lifestyle shifts and some of the patterns that he, or like what are his ways of thinking? You know,
Yeah. So
and
there's a
what is
lot,
his background?
but
Is he a doctor? Is he a
so
naturopath?
so he went to school in University of Miami. He was gonna do med school, or he was gonna, or he was. I'm pretty sure he was pre med, but
Mm,
he just saw that that wasn't the way to go. So he didn't do pre med, but after college, he started doing like personal training, became a massage therapist. So right now, John is a licensed massage therapist, doesn't really practice massage, but he does this certain type of stretching called active isolated stretching, where you
mm.
hold the stretch for 2 seconds and release, and then 2 seconds and release. Um, and so that's what he does right now. But yeah, so pretty much John has a lot of views that would align with the conventional health, or like preventative health side of things, but he also has a lot of views that would contradict that, and that people just have never like heard about because it's not out there. So I first encourage everyone to go listen to that podcast because
Yeah.
it's amazing, so much information, and we only touch like the surface. So I hope to do more podcasts with John, because he has very limited time. Like he basically just goes to clients, does stretching, and does that like all day. So he's
Is the
very busy.
stretching the stretching is the most foundational, like transformational thing he has? Is that why he thinks that fascia or the,
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's all about fascia.
okay.
But so the stretching. not necessarily that's the foundation in like what he did for like my dad and my grandma, but
Mm-hmm.
it's so he sees this as like everyone is tight, essentially. His motto is like everyone's tight.
Mm-hmm.
And if we basically make these people not tight, right, by this type of stretching, by this specific type of stretching, that is going to change, that is going to give them this like foundation of improving their health in other spaces as well.
Okay.
So yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, I would say for him back then with my dad and my grandma, the foundation was diet. I think he's changed his views since then, but I would
Mm.
still say he believes that diet is a big foundation in health. Um, and yeah, for him, so for my dad and my grandma, it was a completely vegan diet, and for my dad, getting off of Dilantin and losing 60 pounds, that specific diet for that time
Mm-hmm.
was literally just plants, a little bit of like olive oil to cook the vegetables in, um, and sorry, not even just plants, sorry, just vegetables. So like
Okay.
he didn't even have like tofu or like beans or anything like that. It was strictly just
Hmm.
pounds and pounds of vegetables. Um, and so that was kind of the foundation there. And then also, I'll just say a few of like John's, I guess, really interesting views that aren't shared that much. So one would be exercise. So John has a very interesting take on exercise. And he gets this from both Chinese medicine and then also some more modern Western medical or research. And that is that Chinese medicine says the faster you move, the faster you die. And so
Hmm.
John believes that we should be incorporating slow movements into our lifestyle and that we should be avoiding anything fast. So
So
these are things,
Qigong and
Qigong, yep. Um, but these are things like running and cycling and these sort of exercises, John thinks are harming our health more than they are improving our health. And that would align with Chinese medicine. And it would also, there are some really interesting studies out there that anyone can go look up on like PubMed. Two that come to mind. I'll quickly share these. So there's one, they took they took over 300 men athletes and they split them up into three groups. So it was non-athletes, um, late onset athletes, so athletes who started endurance training after 30 years of age, and then lifelong endurance athletes, which are athletes who have been doing this endurance training for their entire life. And they did a coronary CT angiogram on all these athletes, and they also confounded for different things like genetics and diet and things like that. So it was a really well done study.
hmm.
And what they found, which is, it goes against what is currently thought of. So what they found was that these lifelong endurance athletes had more plaque, had more coronary plaque buildup in their arteries than these non-athletes, and then also these late onset athletes. So there's a dose dependent curve. Essentially, when there's a dose dependent curve, that basically brings more validity to a correlational study and a correlational result,
Mm-hmm.
because uh, you have these non-athletes who have the lowest amount of plaque, late onset a little bit more, and then lifelong even more. And the plaque that they had was this soft plaque. So soft plaque is considered more of like a dangerous plaque because it can come off of the artery and then that can cause a heart attack. But and yeah, so that's a really interesting study. There's also one other study that looked at this more at a molecular level, and they had these cyclists. Now the problem with this study is that I believe it was only 12 participants. So it's really small sample size, but interesting nonetheless. They had these participants. They went on a stationary cycling bike and they did a muscle biopsy. So muscle biopsy, essentially taking a piece of muscle out of someone's, I believe they did their thigh.
Hmm.
So taking a piece of muscle out of their thigh. And they found that with the increase in uh, um, basically output on the spike, and the faster these cyclists were cycling, they found that their mitochondria were functioning at a decreased level the faster they moved on the spike. So
Hmm.
yeah, and that study was published in Cell, which is a really renowned journal article. So you have that study, and there's a New York Times article referencing the study, which is actually really interesting. Basically titled in a way something like, "Is HIT really that good for us?" or something like that. So really interesting stuff. And yeah, so you mentioned qigong, so that is like a also foundational aspect of what John believes in terms of movement. Qigong is amazing. The qigong though that John practices is this specific type of qigong called Lamas qigong, Lamas, Lamas qigong, and the current lineage holder is Grandmaster Low, Adrian Simon Low, and Master Low. Actually, funny backstory here. So my mom, so Master Low used to live. So we lived in Boca Raton, Florida, South Florida, close to Miami. And Master Lo used to live here. And when my mom was pregnant with me, she had daily sessions with Master Lo, so Qigong sessions,
Wow.
where she would practice Qigong, and then Master Lo also can give her healthy Qi. And look, people don't need to believe this, but I'm just going to share you what I've been told. So Master Lo, when I was still in my mom's womb, right, before I was born, he guessed my birth weight to the exact decimal. He also guessed that I was going to be a male. So, I mean, obviously 50-50 chance, but nonetheless. So both those things. And what he claims is, well, two points here. What he claims is that he's able to see chi, essentially. And if people don't know what chi is basically like the life force in us, right? So,
Yep.
and he says he can see this chi and this energy from people. And John actually tells an interesting story that, so there was, and John is also a master of qigong, who's trained by Master Lo. And he tells a story about how, so it was John and a couple other masters of qigong, and Master Lo, and essentially they had a voltmeter, right? So this meter that can pick up voltage, and I don't know the exact details of the story, I can't recall, but essentially they tested all the people around Master Lo, and it was all like low voltage. And then they tested Master Lo, and his voltage was like through the roof. It's crazy.
Cool.
So some really interesting stuff. I really hope to get him on the podcast. There is one podcast of that he was on YouTube for people to go listen to. The name of the podcast is Guy Radio. If you just search that up, then like Adrian Simon Low, it should pop up. And so yeah, Master Lo he's a pretty cool dude. I've yet to meet him, at least meet him where I could remember the interaction, because I did meet him when I was really young. But yeah, so qigong is definitely another foundation of what John has to say. And then also magnet therapy. So this is not really talked about that much in the health space, but this guy William Philpott, and I asked Jack Kruse on my podcast if he knows who William Philpott is, because I actually wasn't expecting, or I guess I probably should have known that he knew who he was, but he doesn't talk about William Philpott at all. So I wasn't really sure if he knew, but he did know. So that was pretty cool to see. But William Philpott, he was a psychiatrist, and he basically found that North Pole magnetic therapy has this immense health benefit to our body. So our bodies love negative charges, right? And negative polarities. Just like grounding. When you're grounding, you're getting those negative electrons into your body. So it's a very similar concept. And this negative polarity essentially really just puts your cells in the right state that they need to be in. And so I've been sleeping on a magnet mattress my entire life. So essentially this mattress is like this foam mattress, and then there's these little small rectangular magnets embedded in it. And yeah, so there's a couple of good books on it. There's one just titled like Magnet Therapy. If you look at Magnet Therapy, William H. Philpott. But yeah, so those are some interesting things that John has to say. And and yeah, so John has pretty much been like the backbone of the I guess like ideas that our family holds.
I love it, man. This is why you are who you are. It's a huge core inspiration for you, and you can. I love to hear how and why people are the way they are because you dig in and you're like, oh, well, this makes more sense. Because when I first started to see just the low resolution view of you, it's just this. It's just like looking at a low resolution map, right? And then you get a little
Mhm.
more detail. And now it's like, well, this makes way more sense. This guy in the womb was having his mother, like your mother was, in a state, even her nervous system and everything that's being affected by that. And then the way that she was probably eating and just that, like when you're in that 9 month exponential developmental phase, that has more of an impact than we could even rather conceive of. We don't even know how to measure that. And then you think about this master, this Qigong master,
Yeah.
predicting, your birth weight and all that stuff. I don't write that off as woo because I'm lucky to have had my own deep dive into my own subjective experiences, whether it be in the float tank or whether it be plant medicines or just breath work. And I do believe in chi and in energy being the foundation, of course, because we're electromagnetic beings.
Hmm. Exactly.
And yeah, at the root of being a human being, I think that what I've learned is that it's all energy management. And it's all about raising the vibration and getting your energy balance right. And years ago, I had a back injury when I was like 30, and it shoved me down this path. It was like my greatest teacher. And it led me to a really cool acupuncturist who was now retired. He was an older Chinese man, but he was really good at acupuncture. And he was the first person that really helped me to understand the meridians and
Hmm.
the chi. And in 3 sessions, he's like, you no longer need to come back. He wasn't trying to make money at all. It was almost like I went from not being able to put my boot on and thinking my whole career as a fireman was over to understanding the nature, remembering actually the nature of energy, redirecting it and starting to focus on inner healing, which was a whole journey of itself. And it took some years, but I never went back to that guy. And I had to drive
Mm.
an hour and a half to get to him up in this little town where I live in Arizona. And driving there was almost like, is this even worth it? Because it was so painful just to sit in the car for that
Mm.
long. And I swear by that third session, I was done. I never had to go back. So I'm a huge believer in energy and managing energy. And so it's cool to hear that you've had this crazy influence of someone who truly, he's a true practitioner. I'd love to meet this guy someday or hear him on your podcast or whatever, because this
Yeah.
type of stuff is right up my alley.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of
Another
people, oh, go for it.
I just wanted to quickly add that so my mom when she had me, she was 41 years old, and the doctors considered her high risk of essentially like the child not being born or being having defects, right? Um, and a lot of people around her, as well as the doctors, wanted to have an abortion, and my mom was
Wow.
like, "That's not happening," right? And so after that, she had a session with one of the doctors. After that, she was like, "All right, for this pregnancy, I'm not going back to a doctor after this." So when she actually had me, she did have me in the hospital, just precautionary. Obviously, if she probably would have rathered it be like a home birth, but you never know what could happen. So she did have me in the hospital, but a doctor never even laid hands on me when I was born, nothing like that. So a pretty cool um, experience there as well.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people, almost 90% of the population is going to hear this type of uh, story or experience and the grounding and the energy and the magnets. And it's like you said, it's hard for them to have that paradigm shift really
Mhm.
quickly. Doesn't mean it isn't possible. Obviously, that's why we're
Mhm.
able to share and that's why we're here. But the belief system shift is the first and most important part for healing and for this to work. And it's not to say that, like even the placebo effect. I don't know if you've gotten into like Joe Dispenza's work, and
Mhm.
obviously he's sort of a sales guy, but um, it's just true. It's like once you get that paradigm shift and you can understand that you are a part of this interconnected energetic soup, then it's like you can start to understand that, like, yeah, there is no woo when it comes to grounding and walking barefoot on the grass or on the sand. And you just think of it as just duh. It's like, why
Yeah.
isn't that in every children's book as the foundation of interconnectedness? And that's what a lot of ancient cultures knew, but we've forgotten now because we've gotten so away from our path. And that's why everybody's sick. And we rely on external devices or doctors or authoritarian figures to tell us about our own health. And it's funny because your mother did the opposite of that, which is going to make you completely amplified version of that. And it's going to be so good for people to continue here. I'm excited to see your journey unfold and to continue hearing like what you come across and learn, because you can learn more in 1 year than someone in 40 years that's stuck in a linear path. You know,
Very
and it's the
true.
same thing
Yeah.
with relationships. Like you can have a relationship with someone in 1 year, have more depth and understanding and connection than someone that's been married to their partner for 20 years and they watch, mindless stuff and they've never had a real in-depth conversation and never connected on the deepest energetic level. So I don't believe in linear time at all. I think it's all just it's time and space is just this sort of interconnected weird thing that we have in our minds. But anyway, you're definitely advanced human being and it's fun to talk to you.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's really an inspiration. And then I like what you were talking about with Qigong and slowing down and some of the studies they were doing, because that was actually the big part of in my journey, and I hope for other people too, is our Western culture. We praise momentum, we glorify it,
Hmm.
and we reward it with money and fame. And so it's really this model that everybody thinks is what success is momentum.
Hmm.
And, if you ask somebody, hey, how are you? They say, oh, I'm good. I've been busy. That's almost like a badge of honor. And I've started to realize over the last 15 years that that is just not a healthy response. I hope I never just say I'm busy and that being the final, like, yes, they're off my back and now they all think I'm doing something great. Because busyness is actually a way to distract you from the interconnected, lucid element of being a
Exactly.
human being. And you can't receive and feel and move through this environment in a way that's a little bit differently. And in the East, not saying they had it all figured out, but we are missing the yin to the yang. If
Hmm.
we're thinking of the whole, like, yeah, it's good to ramp things up and we praise Elon Musk, but we're not praising the Qigong master and the guy on the hill that's sitting and meditating and he's able to cure his own ailments, like a Wim Hof or something.
Yeah.
And so I think it's time to get back to the yin and to start slowing down. And I've been implanting that mode into my life. And it's funny because guys will always push back and say, you didn't even break a sweat today. And I'll be doing movement. It's not anymore on a rectangle either. My yoga practice turns into a flow, and it's more
Hmm.
about the breath and the body and movement. And
Yeah.
next thing you know, I'm doing pull-ups or I'm doing a kettlebell, and it's always trying to be outside as much as possible, like you said. And I'm
Yeah.
curious what this dude John thinks about Dr. Jack's work and light and all of that. How does he feel about the light
Yeah.
story?
Yeah. I don't know if he specifically knows Jack. But yeah, he definitely agrees. He would definitely agree with the light story. Essentially, be outside as much as possible, getting sunshine. We so one qigong practice that has to do with light that both John practices, I've practiced it, my mom as well, and Master Lowe's a huge proponent of it, is sun gazing. So sun gazing essentially is in the way we do it, right? Because some people will look at the sun middle of the day. Do not do that.
Yeah.
That is very bad. um, so sun gazing essentially is right when the very tip of the sun passes the horizon, comes up at the horizon, you're able to essentially gaze and stare at the sun for the first 20 minutes of sunrise. Um, and essentially it's like a meditative practice, but it's also an energetic practice. And so um, in qigong, right, this sun gazing essentially opens up the energy pathways of your body and brings in, essentially, if you think of your body as a battery, right, which a lot of people like Gerald Pollack would attest to. If you think of your body as a battery, essentially sun gazing is increasing that battery charge, right, and filling your
Hmm.
battery up. Um, and yeah, so definitely the sun story is definitely there with John. Yeah, like I said, don't know if he actually knows who Jack is. He may, but yeah, the that sun story and the light story is important.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about how long have you been like sun gazing and what are some of your morning habits, daily habits, and things that you think are the foundational, if you could, I always ask this question at the end, but we might as well start now. If you were going to die today, because
Mm.
you're pretty wise enough to think of that as not a bad answer, more of like an inspirational, this actually helps me to leverage and give people the most valuable thing I have to offer. What are some of the things you'd want to share with the world? Especially
Yeah.
about your practical habits, like things that you actually want to implement to
Mhm.
like your daily rituals and
Yeah. Yeah. No. So I'll first start with, I guess, my daily habits, and then I can answer that question.
hmm
Um, so yeah, I would say like a foundational morning routine is to get outside. Like it is so foundational. And like, look, I'm in college right now. I see it firsthand. Kids don't do this, right? And it's so like it's really sad.
hmm
So I'll wake up before sunrise, be outside, and there's like no one out. There's like legit not one single human being outside. And when you think of that about that from an evolutionary standpoint, it's like so bizarre, right? If we go back thousands of years ago, morning, everyone would be outside like that.
right.
Morning, that starts your day, right? The alarm clock doesn't start your day; the sun starts your day. And so when you're aligned with the sun and with the earth's natural rhythm, right? Your body gets in its natural rhythm, right? Your circadian rhythm. And so I would say that is such a foundational habit of mine. And yeah, so I guess kind of what I do is wake up out of my magnet mattress and brush my teeth real quick. Brush my teeth real quick. I drink when I'm home because I don't have it back up in college, but I drink hydrogen water. So right here, this is I don't know if you've heard of it, Kangen water. Um, Essentially just hydrogen enriched water with also a lot of other minerals. Um, I get a glass of that, drink that down, and then I really fortunately live 5 minutes from the beach, which is amazing. So I drive to the beach and watch the sunrise. This is what I did today. So um, unfortunately today there's a little it was pretty cloudy, so couldn't do my full sun gaze practice, but I looked in that direction and it was awesome. But yeah, that's kind of like that little morning routine, really just being out in nature. And also in the morning is I try to stay away from my phone. I do have it on me, but I don't typically go on like social media and stuff like that um, in the mornings. So I think that's really important as well because that will help you being aligned with nature, right? If the phone is such a distraction, and look, it's like that's just the reality of it today. Like we need our, it just unfortunately is how it is that a phone is really a necessity the way we live today. And like I acknowledge that, and so really just trying to do your best to not be on it as much as possible and not to consume as much as possible. So being a creator, it's definitely hard, but I try to focus on creating more than I am consuming, right? And I think that's like the best way to look at it. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of the morning routine. Um, and I guess some other like little habits that I do. So I have an infrared sauna. I do Epsom salt baths. I um, our pool right here is a salt pool, so no chlorine, and just staying away from as many chemicals as possible. So there's so many little things, but really what you want to think about is being as natural as possible. So think
hmm
about all right, few thousand years ago, was this a thing? Right? Think about that. If the answer
Right.
was yes, then all right, go ahead, go for it and do that. If the answer is no, you should probably stay away from that, right? Um, all the clothes I have on right now are 100% natural fibers, um, and just like little things like that, they really go a long way. Um, but yeah, so and then getting, I guess, to your question, what would be something I want to tell the world? There's definitely a lot I would want to tell the world. But I mean, I guess it would go back to my motto of question everything, right? Have that mindset of being being skeptical, but not in a way of like being skeptical just to be that way. Do
hmm
it in a way of like I want to learn, right? And in a way of like I've said before, I don't have the truth, and I'm trying to find the truth. And if you come at it that way, that really sets you up for a great path forward, I believe.
I love it. And there's probably so much more in that too, because you're saying the little things, but it's the big things. Those things that you're talking about are the biggest things. And
Mhm.
it's like, you know, this at a young age. I have a niece that's 20. She's awesome. And I
Yeah.
just want her to I'm going to send her this, you know, I want her younger people that are in that age demographic and older people from all ages. It doesn't matter, but I really just want to see the kids get off of the vape pens and get off of the smartphone blue lit screens all day. And they don't know that their attention's being raped. And maybe I think they've been, there's this technology has been deployed so rapidly and for incentives, obviously. If you listen to Tristan Harris and all these guys, it's like these things are engineered for addiction.
Hmm.
And then, you know, Dr. Jack's whole world of how and why and the backstory is fascinating. We don't need to give people all that or expect them to go that deep, but just some of the fundamental stuff that you're like, oh, it's the little stuff. It's so big though,
Yeah.
because if people start to get their circadian health back and start to get back to nature, that is like you. That's your true self. And if you're seeking the truth, well, the truth is nobody knows the truth. There is no foundation. You're never going to find like, well, this is the thing. But you find out more about it, and it seems like Richard Feynman always said it's not like there's an overarching truth, maybe. And if there is, cool, maybe we'll discover that and it'll be interesting. But it's like a layer of an onion, and it just gets more and more weird and more interesting. And I think if you're just constantly seeking to learn more about the nature of reality, life does simplify. It's almost like it doesn't get more complex, it gets more interesting, but your behavior patterns actually get more subtle and more simple. And then there's something a little more easy to fall back on, which are these foundational principles that you're sharing. And it's important stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
why,
Yeah.
yeah, go for it.
I said it. I said this to Jack. Like, I think one of the reasons why I am able to question things is because of the lifestyle that I do live, and also being outside and in nature, right? I think it's unfortunate that people today, they're so disconnected from nature that it puts them in this mindset of just listening to people and to authority and agreeing with authority without questioning
Hmm.
authority. And I mean, truthfully, I do believe that the reason why I am able to question authority is because I am in tune with nature and living this type of lifestyle.
I 100% agree. I wouldn't even doubt that for a second, because the truth is when you can listen, not only listen to, it's listening from within and or
Mm,
listening to nature itself and like having that defragmentation. It's like we're not fasting enough from information and from bombardment of this influx. And so you're when you go out into nature and you're spending time in these spaces, you're able to actually see and perceive, and your energy field's a little more clear and open. And if the social engineers, which are there, and I've done my own weird deep rabbit hole, not like Dr. Jack, but deeper than anyone I've ever met. Anyone that knows me, my good friends know that I'm down the rabbit hole when it comes to learning about the nature of how we think,
mhm,
because I want to know like who engineered this thing. What did they learn in the 1950s, 60s, 70s with MK Ultra? And when they take that information, it only gets more sophisticated and advantageous for them to use screen time, TikTok, all these things to capture people and to drive the culture in directions. But if you don't want to go there, you don't have to. You can just think of the foundation and be like, yeah, does this make sense? Does it make sense that you wake up at 10 a.m., you look at your smartphone and you start staring at it and scrolling, and then all of a sudden you rip your vape pen and then you smoke some THC that's 80% THC because it's not cannabis anymore. It's like they compress it into this super drug, and then you're microdosing so that you can constantly feel just high enough. It's like this whole movement of psychedelics, and it's like all for medicine and therapy, and they're telling everyone they're victimized and traumatized, and so everyone's got this self obsession. It's almost narcissistic amplification of you got to heal your trauma and all your ancestors trauma. It's like, what happened to being grateful for the fact that you're alive and awake and aware, and there's life and there's sun, and trauma actually makes you strong and resilient. And it's like we gotta wake up. It's time to pull out of the matrix, get back into nature and pay attention. We don't
Yeah.
need more psychedelics. I
Oh
mean,
my gosh. I completely agree with you.
people are getting lost in this psychedelic renaissance because it's being developed and deployed that way. And it's to get at ketamine is the new opium crisis, and they're using veterans and first responders as the guinea pigs because
Mm,
that's their sales pitch. And I know it can work and there's tools there. I've benefited from plant medicines myself, but I think no one knows the nature of the dark history of them, and no one's having the real conversation about the negative ailments that are
mm.
associated with it.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
When I was at Eudaimonia, it's funny that you're bringing this up. Um, there there were so many speakers talking about microdosing and psychedelics, and like, my brother and I went to this one speaker, and we just went because like we had free time. We are like, all right, let's just pop in and see what this is about. We didn't really know what it was about, and then he talks about microdosing. And we're like, all right, ready to go, and then we left. Like, it, yeah, it's too much. It's like, yeah, I'll leave
well,
it
and
at that.
microdosing is a weird, deep subject, and it's being sold. It's like I went to
Yeah.
the MAPS I've been to 4 of those conferences just to see what's happening, and it's a giant sales event now. And everybody's selling the next big thing, and
Mhm.
it's gotten overhyped. And then it's Soma. If you think of Aldous Huxley and Brave New World, it's like let's get everybody numb, distracted, disassociated. Let's get them feeling good. And I think of it as psychological pain management. So you're giving people Oxycontin basically, but for the mind and the psyche. And
Mhm.
so like, yeah, just take microdosing. Don't feel the negative emotion that would drive you to make the behavior shift in your life or to be activated to find meaning and to so I think the whole psychedelic movement was created by MK Ultra and by the CIA, and I think it's still here, and it's actually far more deep than we could ever imagine. So
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
but anyway, I wanted to ask you to really dig a little bit deeper one more time and share a couple more things that if you were truly going to die today, you could even take a second, take a breath, and really imagine like this is your last time chatting. And think like what would you want to share with not only your mother, your best friends, maybe some people that you truly love, but like maybe this is it. This is the last time you ever get to share. And maybe you even get reincarnated and you're speaking to your future self if you want to be selfish about it.
Yeah. Um, it's a really good question. So, um, so when my dad passed away, uh, I here wait, let me back up a little bit. Um, so right when I was growing up, I was raised. So my mom was Catholic, my dad was Jewish, and so I celebrated both Christmas and Hanukkah and both holidays on both sides of the religion. And um but I was never raised like religious, right? It was kind of just like, all right, we celebrate the holidays and you kind of go about our lives after that. But when my dad passed away, that was again another wake up call, and that is when I turned to God, and part of my um, idea of questioning everything is like, all right, I questioned like, all right, like where did all this come from, right? And that led me ultimately, long story short, led me to the Christian faith and a follower of Jesus. And um, if I were to die today, knock on wood, hopefully that doesn't happen, but it would be to just share the gospel, because I believe that's truth. And it's hard to like say I believe that's truth because yes, I believe that is the truth, but at the same time, um, I don't want people to just believe it because I'm saying it's truth, right? So again, question it. I question my faith on a daily basis, and I think that for me, that strengthens my faith. Um, but it also is a great practice and a much needed practice. Um, and so yeah, so if I were to die today, I would be sharing the gospel.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that because that's something vulnerable that not everyone would be willing to share, especially publicly. And at the root of that, I hear you consistently going back to seeking truth. And I think that's beautiful because each person's going to find their journey and the deep truths. Like this is an existential thing that you found through your father's death, and really getting to the core of like, why am I here? What is this? What's the
Hmm.
meaning? Which drives you to actually find and create the meaning, even if you found it through Christianity and your faith is in that. It makes you really think that everything has meaning versus the opposite, which our culture is suffering from, which is nihilism and meaninglessness. And
Exactly.
at the core, I always think of like I've seen a lot of suffering in my life just through the nature of my work, and
Yeah.
it's always made me really curious to understand the nature of suffering and like why is it so so normal to see hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, but I've seen thousands of just drug addiction. You see murders, you see all this stuff, right? That you'd call evil or just complete chaos. And so, if you want to understand the nature of it, you have to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's an important thing to learn about. And for every person, they're going to find different little nuggets. But just seeking in itself gives life meaning.
Hmm.
Instead of just sticking your head in the sand or avoiding it and staying busy, which is the easier way to do it, and to repress things or to medicate or to microdose or whatever you think you're doing that's going to get you over the hump, it's not sustainable. You have to have meaning. And I love Viktor Frankl's work because he lived through the Holocaust and he lost his family and it was just pure chaos. And
Hmm.
he talks about just creating meaning and how that's the most important thing we can do. And all the great philosophers that I've studied, could be Jesus, it could be Buddha, could be all these different people, they come back with these core principles. And I just love that you went back to that because I think that that's what makes you, I can tell you have a lot of vital energy. You're a good person and you can lay your head down at night and know that. So it makes you go about your day with a little bit of a contagious, high vibrational, good energy. And it's awesome. So
It does. Yeah.
it's been fun chatting with you, Jonathan. I look forward
It's been
to
great.
seeing you evolve and learning from you over the years. And we'll have to stay connected for sure.
100%.
Right,
I would love to. Yeah.
right on, brother. I hope you well. And I thank you for your time this morning.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.